In the city of New York, a place of 9 million stories constantly unfolding, over 1,200 stories come to a silent, solitary end each year. That is the number of people whose bodies go unclaimed from the city's morgues. It's a quiet statistic, one that doesn't make headlines, but it speaks volumes about the spaces that can open up between us, even in the most crowded of places. This isn't a phenomenon unique to one city. It's a silent, steady current that flows beneath the surface of urban life all over the world. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. This reality brings us to a fundamental question, one that touches upon our deepest ideas of community, dignity, and remembrance. When a person dies without anyone to claim them, what journey does their body take? And what does this quiet, bureaucratic process reveal about our society's values? By the end of our time together, you will have followed this journey from its very beginning, a silent hospital bed, to one of two very different but equally profound final destinations. We will explore the hidden work of those who care for the unclaimed, the history that shapes their final rest, and the meaning we can find in how we treat those who leave the world alone. Our journey begins not in a morgue or a cemetery, but in a place dedicated to life, a hospital. Picture a room, perhaps on the 7th floor, overlooking a street busy with the sounds of ongoing life. Inside, the usual symphony of medical care, the gentle beep of monitors, the soft hiss of oxygen, the footsteps of nurses, has fallen silent. A life has just ended. This moment, in any other circumstance, would trigger a cascade of phone calls, a gathering of family, and the beginning of a well-worn path of grief and ritual. But for the unclaimed, this is where that path diverges into an unmarked territory. The first sign is the silence where a phone call should be. The patient's file is opened, and the space for next of kin is either empty, or the number listed has been disconnected for years. There is no one to notify. In this moment, a person who lived a life full of texture, of memories, of connections however frayed, begins the slow, administrative transformation into a case number. The hospital staff, who may have cared for this person for days or weeks, are the first stewards in this posthumous journey. They perform their duties with a quiet professionalism that is, in itself, a form of respect. The body is treated with care, cleaned and prepared. The few personal effects, perhaps a worn book, a single key, a faded photograph in a wallet, are carefully cataloged. These small items are the last echoes of a personal history, and they are treated as vital clues in a search that has not yet officially begun. The individual is then moved from the room where they died to the hospital's morgue, a clean, cold, and quiet space. This is a place of transition, a holding space between the end of a personal story and the beginning of a public responsibility. Here, the silence is different. It's not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping ward. It's the profound stillness of waiting. The body is now under the care of the institution, and a legal clock has begun to tick. Most jurisdictions have laws that dictate how long a hospital can hold a body while the search for family is underway, often a period of weeks, sometimes a month. It is a race against time, a search for a thread of connection before the anonymity becomes permanent. Think about the sheer scale of a modern healthcare system. It's a vast, intricate web of human interaction, technology, and procedure designed to preserve life. But it must also have a system for what happens when life ends, especially when it ends in solitude. The last lonely bed in the hospital is the starting point of a process that is both deeply humane in its intentions and starkly impersonal in its execution. It has to be. The system is designed to provide a dignified and orderly process for every single person, regardless of their circumstances. It is a safety net woven from regulations, paperwork, and the quiet diligence of public servants. For the person lying in the morgue, their name is still theirs, their story is still their own, but the responsibility for their final chapter has now been passed from the personal to the public sphere. This transition highlights a fundamental truth about our interconnected world, that it is still possible to become completely disconnected. We live with digital footprints, social security numbers, and records that trace our existence from birth. Yet for some, these threads become so thin that they offer no path back to a family or a friend. The reasons are as varied as the lives themselves. Social isolation that deepened over decades, the slow erosion of family ties through conflict or distance, or simply outliving everyone who ever knew your name. The person in the last lonely bed is not necessarily someone who was unloved their entire life, but someone who, at the very end, slipped through the cracks of human connection. The hospital staff see this regularly. They see the empty visitor's chair day after day. They are the last people to speak to many of these individuals, the last to hold their hand. And when the time comes, they are the ones who initiate the dispassionate yet necessary process that ensures no one is simply erased. This process is a mirror. In it, we can see our societal values reflected in stark clarity. We see a commitment to order, to public health, and to a baseline of dignity. We see a system that refuses to abandon anyone, even after death. Time 1.5s. But we also see the limits of that system. A world where the warmth of personal remembrance is replaced by the cold efficiency of a state-managed process. The journey from this first moment of stillness is a long one. It will involve investigators trying to piece together a life from fragments, navigating complex social and economic realities, and confronting centuries of history that have shaped how we care for the dead who have no one. It is the story of what happens when a community's formal responsibility begins where personal connection ends. The body in the morgue is waiting, a silent testament to a life that was lived, and a quiet question posed to the society that now must provide its final, solitary farewell. From this quiet, temperature-controlled room, a search for a name, a family, a story will begin in earnest. A final attempt to pull a single, unique human life back from the brink of anonymity. Let us return to that quiet room where the machinery that sustained a life has been silenced. The moment of stillness that follows the last breath is not one of emptiness, but of profound transition. A doctor or a senior nurse performs the final, solemn duty of their care, the official declaration of death. This is a meticulous, ritualized process. They listen for a heartbeat, for the sound of breath. They check for pupillary response to light, all the clinical signs that confirm life has ceased. The time is noted with precision, down to the minute. This single entry in a medical chart is a critical threshold. At this moment, a human being, a patient with a name and a history legally becomes the deceased. The primary objective of the hospital, to heal and preserve life, is now replaced by a new set of responsibilities, to preserve dignity and to begin the search for connection. Once the declaration is made, a new kind of care begins. Nurses, often the same ones who provided comfort in the final hours, will perform what is known as posthumous care. It is a task carried out with immense respect and gentleness. Medical lines and tubes are removed. The body is carefully washed, and a clean gown or shroud is placed. This is not a medical necessity. It is a fundamentally human one. It is an act of closure, a final gesture of kindness to the physical vessel that carried a life. Any personal belongings found at the bedside or in the closet, a well-read paperback, a pair of glasses, a worn wallet, are collected with the care of an archivist. Each item is inventoried, placed in a labeled bag, and secured. These humble objects are now more than possessions. They are the last tangible pieces of an identity, and potentially the first clues in the search for a family. For the staff, this work is a quiet meditation on the lives that pass through their hands. They see the beginning of the institutional process, but for a short while, they are the sole guardians of a personal legacy. From the hospital room, the journey continues down quiet corridors, away from the active wards of the living to the hospital morgue. This is not the grim, foreboding place of fiction. A modern hospital morgue is a clinical, sterile, and technologically advanced space, often called a temperature-controlled holding facility. It is, in essence, a sanctuary of preservation. The primary purpose is to halt the relentless march of time on the physical body, using refrigeration to slow down the natural processes of decomposition. Think of it as a library's climate-controlled archive, designed to protect a precious and unique manuscript until its story can be properly handled. Here, the deceased is assigned a unique identifying number, a tag that ensures there are no mistakes. This number will follow them throughout the entire administrative journey that lies ahead. It's another layer of the transformation from a person to a case file, a step that is impersonal yet essential for maintaining order and dignity within a complex system. It is here, in this cold, quiet stillness, that the legal clock officially starts ticking. The moment a body is placed in the morgue without a clear next of kin, the hospital's social work or patient affairs department is notified, and a formal case is opened. The law, which varies from state to state and country to country, now imposes a strict timeline. This is the official grace period during which the institution must make a diligent effort to locate family. This period can be as short as 14 days or as long as a month, sometimes more in complex cases. This time frame is a delicate balance. It must be long enough to allow for a thorough investigation, but short enough to manage the practical realities of limited morgue capacity and the natural imperative for a final resting place. This ticking clock introduces a quiet sense of urgency into the process. Every day that passes without a phone call, without a lead, brings the individual one step closer to being officially declared unclaimed. The hospital's role during this period is proactive. A social worker or a case manager begins the painstaking work of detective. They will re-examine the patient's intake forms, looking for any name or number that might have been missed. They will search for an address, an old emergency contact, anything that could serve as a starting point. They are trained to be methodical, compassionate, and resourceful. They understand that behind the paperwork is a human story, a web of relationships that may have simply frayed over time. Their search is the first line of defense against anonymity. They are trying to bridge the gap between the institutional world of the hospital and the personal world of family, friends, and community. But their resources are often limited, and the information they have is frequently outdated or incomplete. Consider the weight of this responsibility. The hospital staff are juggling the care of the living with their duty to the dead. The process is designed to be seamless, to operate quietly in the background of the hospital's primary functions. Yet, it represents a profound social contract. It is an implicit promise that even if you die alone, you will not be immediately forgotten. The system will pause. It will make an effort. It will hold you in a safe, respectful space while it searches for someone who knew you. This period of waiting in the hospital morgue is a testament to that promise. It is a liminal space, a pause between the end of a life and the beginning of a public, communal responsibility for what remains. The silence of the morgue is not an ending. It is the deep breath before the next chapter of the journey begins. The search for a name and a story in the wider world. A search that will be conducted against the steady, implacable ticking of the legal clock. The moment of stillness is over, and the race to find a connection has begun. Once the hospital's internal search for next of kin has been exhausted, and the legal time frame for holding the deceased is drawing to a close, the responsibility shifts. The case is transferred from the medical institution to a civic one, typically the office of the coroner or the medical examiner. This transition marks a critical escalation in the search for a name and a family. The quiet, internal diligence of hospital social workers now gives way to a formal, forensic, and often remarkably tenacious investigation. This is where the true detective work begins, a process that is less about the cause of death and more about the cause of a life, who this person was, and who they belonged to. The body is respectfully transported from the hospital morgue to the county or city morgue, a central repository for all such cases. Here, amidst the quiet hum of refrigeration units, the deceased joins others whose identities or families are unknown, each one a silent puzzle waiting to be solved. The individuals tasked with this work are a unique blend of investigator and public servant. They are not police detectives chasing criminals, but civil servants chasing ghosts in government databases and faded records. Their primary tool is information. The first step is a meticulous re-examination of any personal effects that accompanied the body. A wallet might contain not just an ID, but a crumpled business card, a dry cleaning ticket, a library card, or a photograph with a name scrawled on the back. A worn set of keys might have a tag from a specific locksmith or apartment complex. A tattoo or a piece of jewelry could be a clue. To these investigators, nothing is insignificant. They are trained to see the narrative threads in the mundane detritus of a life. Each item is a potential breadcrumb leading back to a name, a former address, or an old acquaintance who might know where to find family. If personal effects yield no immediate leads, the search moves into the digital realm. The investigator will run the person's name, if known, through a labyrinth of government databases, They check Social Security records, which might list a last known employer. They search tax records, which could point to a past address or a spouse. They look for military service records, which often contain detailed family information. They check with the Department of Motor Vehicles, pension administrators, and even social service agencies. It is a slow, methodical process of cross-referencing and data mining, a digital archaeology that attempts to reconstruct a life from its official paper trail. Think of it as piecing together a mosaic from scattered tiles. Each piece of data is a small, seemingly insignificant tile, but when placed together, they can begin to form a recognizable picture of a person's journey through life and the connections they made along the way. However, this search is often a race against time and the erosion of information. People move, change their names, lose contact. Records can be incomplete or outdated. An address from 5 years ago may now be an empty lot. A listed emergency contact may themselves be deceased. The digital trail can grow cold remarkably quickly, especially for those who have lived on the margins of society, the elderly without close family, the transient, or those who have intentionally withdrawn from the grid. For these individuals, the official records of their life are like a book with half the pages missing. The investigators must then turn to more traditional and sometimes more creative methods. In cases where even a name is uncertain, the task becomes exponentially harder. This is where forensic science plays a crucial role. Fingerprints are taken and run through national law enforcement databases. This is often the single most effective tool for identifying an unknown person, as it can link them to a past arrest or a government employment application. Dental records, if they can be located from a previous dentist, offer another powerful method of positive identification. In more challenging cases, medical examiners may rely on unique surgical implants, like a hip replacement, which have serial numbers that can be traced back to the hospital and the patient. These are the modern tools that give a name to the nameless. They are the voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. When all these avenues have been explored and weeks have turned into a month or more, the office may resort to a final public appeal. This is a delicate and carefully considered step. A public notice might be issued to the media, providing a general description of the person, their approximate age, and the location where they were found or died. Sometimes, a photograph of the deceased or a picture of a distinctive tattoo will be released, a last-ditch effort to jog someone's memory. This act transforms the search from a private, internal process into a public plea. It's an admission that the official systems have failed to find a connection, and it is now up to the community, to the collective memory of the public, to provide an answer. It is a poignant moment, a public announcement of a person's solitude in the hope of finding a private connection. This entire process, from the first file opened by a hospital social worker to the last public notice issued by a coroner, is a testament to a deeply held societal value, that every individual deserves a name. It is a quiet, often invisible, and deeply compassionate struggle against oblivion. The men and women who do this work are the keepers of identity. They fight against the administrative tide that threatens to turn a person into a statistic. They understand that before a final dignified resting place can be provided, the most fundamental dignity of all must be honored, the dignity of a name. But the clock is always ticking. With each passing day, the trail grows colder, and the likelihood of the person being officially declared unclaimed and unidentified grows larger. It is a race against time, a race to find a single thread of kinship before a life story is lost to the quiet, final authority of the administrative process. As the search for a name and a family continues, it's easy to fall back on a common stereotype. We often imagine the unclaimed as shadowy figures from the fringes of society. The chronically homeless, the long-term addict, the anonymous drifter. And while it is true that those living in extreme poverty and isolation are disproportionately represented in these numbers, this picture is dangerously incomplete. The reality is far more nuanced, touching every walk of life. The faces of the forgotten are not a monolith. They are a mosaic of ordinary people whose social safety nets, for a myriad of reasons, failed them at the very end. To truly understand this phenomenon, we must deconstruct this stereotype and look at the diverse and often heartbreaking pathways that lead to a solitary death. One of the largest and fastest growing groups among the unclaimed is the elderly. Considered a quiet, 80-year-old man who lives alone in the same apartment for 40 years. His wife passed away a decade ago. His children moved to different states for work, and his friends from his generation have gradually dwindled. He is fiercely independent, proud, and doesn't want to be a burden. His social interactions shrink to a polite nod with a neighbor, a brief chat with the mail carrier, and a weekly phone call with a son who is juggling his own career and family. When he passes away quietly in his sleep, it may be days before he is discovered. His son, when finally located, is devastated, but lives 1,000 miles away and may not have the resources or ability to handle the arrangements. This is not a story of neglect, but of the slow, gentle drift of modern life, where geographic mobility and the fracturing of the nuclear family can create vast distances, both emotional and physical. Then, there is the profound impact of family estrangement. A middle-aged woman, successful in her career, but long since cut off from her parents and siblings due to a bitter, decades-old feud. She builds a new life, a new circle of friends, but never fully reconciles with her past. When a sudden illness takes her, her colleagues and friends are shocked, but they don't know who to call. They are her chosen family, but they have no legal standing as next of kin. The official search may eventually locate a brother or a sister, but the old wounds are too deep. They may be unwilling or emotionally unable to step forward and claim her, leaving the state to become the reluctant custodian of her final affairs. This is a story repeated in countless ways, a reminder that broken relationships can have consequences that extend even beyond the grave, leaving a person in a state of familial limbo. Beyond social isolation and estrangement, there is a starkly economic reason a person might become unclaimed: the rise of what is now known as funeral poverty. The cost of a basic funeral and burial can be staggering, often running into thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. For many families already living on the financial edge, this sudden, unexpected expense is simply impossible to bear. This is a particularly cruel dilemma. The investigators from the medical examiner's office may successfully locate a family, a loving family, who desperately wants to provide a proper farewell. But when faced with the choice between paying for a funeral and paying their rent or buying food for their children, they are forced to make an agonizing decision. They must formally refuse to claim the body, not out of a lack of love, but out of a lack of means. This is not abandonment. It is a quiet surrender to an economic reality that has priced them out of one of life's most essential rituals. The state then steps in, not because there is no one who cares, but because the ones who care are unable to afford the cost of that care. Let's consider a few anonymized stories that paint this picture more clearly. There was the story of a former musician, a man who had a brief flash of fame in the 1970s, but spent the last 30 years of his life in quiet obscurity, working odd jobs. He had no children, and his only living relative was a cousin in another country with whom he hadn't spoken in 40 years. When he died, the public administrator found royalty checks for a few $100s that had gone uncashed for years. He wasn't destitute, but he was completely disconnected. Or the story of a young immigrant who came to the city for a better life, working 2 jobs to send money home. He shared a small apartment with other workers, but his connections were transient. When he died in an accident, his roommates knew only his first name. With no official documentation and no family in the country, the long process of trying to identify him and notify his family in a distant village began, a process that could take months or even years. These stories humanize the statistics. They show us that the path to dying alone is not a single dark road, but a network of many different, often subtle, social and economic pressures. It can be the result of mental illness that pushes people away, the slow fade of social connections in old age, the sharp break of family conflict, or the simple, brutal reality of poverty. The one thing that connects all these disparate lives is the absence of a single person who is willing and able to step forward at the moment of death and say, "They are with me." Understanding this complexity is crucial. It moves us away from judgment and towards compassion. It forces us to see the unclaimed not as a faceless problem to be managed, but as individuals who were once as connected as any of us, and whose final solitude is a reflection not just of their personal circumstances, but of the society we all share. Their stories are a quiet but powerful commentary on the fragility of our social fabric and the profound need for a final resting place, a need that sometimes only the community as a whole can fulfill. When the exhaustive search for family ends in failure, or when a family is forced to refuse a claim, the individual's journey takes a decisive turn. They enter a path with a history as old as civilization itself, a path that leads to what has been known for centuries as a potter's field. This term, steeped in history and often misunderstood, is not merely a place, but an idea. The idea that a society has a fundamental obligation to provide a final, earthly resting place for every person, regardless of their status or wealth. To understand the modern municipal burial, we must first walk through the long, often somber history of these common graves. The name itself has ancient, almost mythical origins. It comes from a passage in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Matthew. After Judas Iscariot betrays Jesus, he is filled with remorse and returns the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests. Unwilling to put the blood money back into the temple treasury, the priests use it to purchase a field from a potter, a plot of land with clay-rich soil, to be used as a burial ground for strangers and the indigent. And so, the Akeldama, the field of blood, became the first potter's field. This story, whether taken as literal history or powerful allegory, established a foundational concept in Western culture: the creation of a dedicated separate space for the burial of the unknown, the foreign, and the poor, funded by a form of public or communal money. It was a place of necessity, but also of otherness. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, this practice continued across Europe. Every parish church had its graveyard, but those who were destitute or strangers who died while passing through were often buried in unconsecrated ground at the edge of the cemetery, sometimes without a marker or even a coffin. It was a stark visual representation of the social hierarchy that governed life, extending even into death. To be buried in a potter's field was to be placed outside the heart of the community, a final, quiet statement of one's low standing. These were not yet the large, organized municipal cemeteries we know today, but small, often forgotten plots of land, their occupants' names lost to time. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries changed everything. As millions of people flocked to rapidly growing cities like London, Paris, and New York, they left their ancestral villages and parish communities behind. Urban poverty swelled, and the sheer number of people dying in anonymity or destitution overwhelmed the old parish systems. This created a public health crisis and a social necessity for a new solution: the large, state-run potter's field. These were born not just of compassion, but of grim pragmatism. Cities needed a way to dispose of the dead in a sanitary and orderly fashion. The Victorian era, with its obsession with order and classification, perfected the potter's field as a bureaucratic institution. Paupers' graves, as they were often called in England, became vast, anonymous landscapes of loss, a visible symbol of the harsh realities of industrial capitalism. Perhaps no place on earth embodies the history and scale of the potter's field more than Hart Island, a small, 1-mile-long strip of land in the Long Island Sound, just off the coast of the Bronx in New York City. Since 1869, this island has served as the city's primary public cemetery. It is the largest taxpayer-funded cemetery in the world, the final resting place for over 1 million souls. For most of its history, Hart Island was a closed, almost secret place, its burials carried out by inmates from the nearby Rikers Island jail. The dead were placed in simple pine boxes with a number etched on the lid and buried in long, deep trenches, stacked 3 coffins high. Adults in one trench, infants in another. For decades, there were no individual markers, only a small concrete post indicating the trench number and the date of burial. The story of Hart Island is the story of New York itself. It holds the unclaimed victims of the Great Spanish Flu epidemic of 1918, the forgotten casualties of the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and most recently, the unclaimed victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a silent repository of the city's history, holding the stories of those who arrived seeking a dream and died without a name, those who fell through the cracks of the system, and those whose families simply could not afford a private burial. For years, the island was difficult for families to visit. Its records were hard to access, and a deep stigma was attached to being buried there. It was a place spoken of in whispers, a symbol of ultimate social failure. In recent years, however, there has been a profound shift in how we perceive these places. Thanks to the tireless work of artists, journalists, and activists, the perception of Hart Island and other Potter's Fields is changing. There is a growing movement to reclaim these spaces not as symbols of shame and neglect, but as sacred grounds that deserve respect and remembrance. The city of New York has taken over control of the island from the Department of Correction, making it more accessible to the public. Efforts are underway to digitize the burial records, to help families locate their loved ones, and to create a place of memorialization. This shift reflects a deeper change in our understanding of social responsibility. We are beginning to recognize that the history of the Potter's Field is not just the history of the poor and the forgotten. It is our history. It tells a story about how we, as a society, have cared for our most vulnerable members. It is a physical ledger of our compassion and our neglect, a landscape that holds the quiet weight of a million silent stories waiting to be acknowledged. The historical Potter's Field, with its bleak connotations of anonymity and neglect, has slowly evolved. While the fundamental purpose remains the same, to provide a final resting place for those without resources, the modern municipal burial is a process shaped by a greater awareness of dignity, public health regulations, and a quiet sense of civic duty. The journey of an unclaimed person today, from the city morgue to their final interment, is a model of sober, respectful, and highly organized procedure. It is a system designed to handle a sensitive task with as much grace as bureaucracy will allow. Once the medical examiner's office has officially designated a body as unclaimed, the administrative gears for a city or county-funded burial begin to turn. The first step is the provision of a suitable container. These are not elaborate, polished caskets, but simple, dignified vessels. Often made of plain pine or a sturdy composite material, they are built for function and respect, not for display. They are clean, modest, and uniform. Inside, the body is typically dressed in a simple shroud or gown provided by the city. This uniformity is a practical necessity, but it also carries a subtle democratic weight. In this final act, distinctions of wealth, status, and worldly success are stripped away. Everyone is afforded the same simple, humble enclosure. The caskets are often identified not by a name, but by a number. This number is the same one that was assigned at the morgue, a unique identifier that has followed the individual throughout this posthumous journey. It is meticulously recorded in a ledger, linking the number to the casket, the burial plot, and whatever personal information is known about the deceased. Their name, if identified, their age, and the date of their death and burial. This ledger is the key. It is the guarantee that even in an unmarked grave, the person is not truly lost. Their location is known, recorded, and can be retrieved if a family member should ever come forward in the future, even decades later. It is the bureaucracy's promise of remembrance. The burials themselves are often conducted with a quiet efficiency. A small team of municipal workers or contracted gravediggers operates the cemetery. They use a backhoe, to excavate a long, deep trench, similar to the historical mass graves of Hart Island. But the process today is far more precise and documented. The caskets are carefully lowered into the trench, often side by side. In many jurisdictions, they are no longer stacked, allowing for a more traditional sense of individual space. The placement of each numbered casket is mapped and recorded on a grid of the cemetery plot. This ensures that while the grave may be communal, the location of each individual within it is precisely known. Is there a ceremony? Sometimes, but rarely in the traditional sense. There is no procession of mourners, no eulogy from a loved one. However, it is not uncommon for the workers themselves or a volunteer chaplain who serves the city to be present as the caskets are interred. They might offer a simple, non-denominational prayer, or simply stand in a moment of silent reflection. These small acts of witness are profoundly important. They ensure that no one is returned to the earth without at least one other human being present to mark their passing. It is a minimal, yet deeply significant ritual. It is an acknowledgement that a life has ended and that this final moment deserves to be observed, however humbly. The workers who perform this task day in and day out often develop a deep, unspoken respect for the dead they serve. They see themselves not as disposers of bodies, but as the final caretakers. Once the trench is filled, the landscape remains stark. In most municipal cemeteries, there are no individual headstones. The cost would be prohibitive, and for the unidentified, there would be nothing to write. Instead, the grave might be marked by a small, flat concrete marker, perhaps with a plot number that corresponds to the burial ledger. The overall impression is one of uniformity and anonymity. It is a landscape of profound quiet, stripped of the personal touches that define a traditional cemetery. There are no flowers left by grieving families, no weathered teddy bears on the grave of a child. It is a space that speaks to the absence of personal connection. This brings us to the central tension of the modern municipal burial. On one hand, it is a remarkable public service. It is the ultimate social safety net, a guarantee that no matter how isolated or impoverished a person is in life, they will not be simply discarded in death. It is a system born of a collective sense of responsibility, a civic promise of a dignified end. The process is orderly, hygienic, and respectful in its own methodical way. It prevents the public health crises of the past and ensures that every human body is treated as such and not as mere waste. And yet, on the other hand, there is an unavoidable sense of loss that pervades these places. Not just the loss of life, but the loss of individual identity. The numbered caskets, the communal graves, the absence of names, all of this speaks to a story that has been erased or was never known. A cemetery is traditionally a library of memory, with each headstone serving as the cover of a unique book. A municipal cemetery, by contrast, can feel like a library of unwritten books. It is a place that powerfully illustrates the difference between being buried and being remembered. The modern system is excellent at the former, but it cannot, by its very nature, provide the latter. That remains the unique and irreplaceable role of family, friends, and a loving community. The municipal burial is a respectful, necessary, and deeply humane process, but its quiet, grassy fields are a constant, silent reminder of the profound human need for a name to be spoken and a story to be told. While the earth of the potter's field represents one final destination for the unclaimed, there is another, equally profound path that some will take. This is a journey not into the soil, but into the heart of medical science. For a significant portion of those who die without family to direct their final arrangements, their last act becomes one of extraordinary contribution: the donation of their body for anatomical study. This is not a haphazard or default outcome. It is a highly regulated, ethically complex, and socially vital alternative that turns a solitary end into a legacy of learning for generations of future healers. The legal frameworks that govern this process are crucial. In many parts of the world, including most states in the U.S., legislation known as the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, or similar laws, provides the structure for this system. These laws were initially designed to facilitate whole-body donation for individuals who chose to do so while they were alive. However, they also contain provisions for what happens when no one is available to make that choice. Typically, a coroner, medical examiner, or another designated public official is given the legal authority to donate an unclaimed body to a medical or dental school for the purpose of education and research. This is a decision that is never taken lightly. It is only made after every reasonable effort to locate next of kin has failed and a legally mandated waiting period has passed. The ethical considerations surrounding this practice are paramount. The core principle is one of public good. The need for human bodies for anatomical study is immense and constant. It is the very foundation of medical education. First-year medical students learn the intricate three-dimensional map of the human body not from textbooks or computer simulations, but from the direct, hands-on experience of dissection. They learn how muscles connect, how nerves branch, how organs sit in relation to one another. This foundational knowledge is irreplaceable and directly translates into the skilled hands of a future surgeon, the diagnostic eye of a future physician, and the gentle touch of a future geriatrician. The decision to donate an unclaimed body is therefore weighed against this immense societal benefit. It is seen as a way to bring a greater meaning and purpose to a death that might otherwise have been marked only by its solitude. The process begins with a formal request from a medical school to the coroner's office. Medical schools have what are known as anatomical donation programs, and they work in close partnership with local authorities. When the coroner has an unclaimed body that is suitable for donation, meaning the cause of death is known, and there is no need for a lengthy forensic investigation, and the body has not suffered extensive trauma, they will notify the program. The medical school then arranges for the respectful transport of the body from the city morgue to their own specialized facility. This is a moment of significant transition. The body is no longer simply unclaimed. It is now a precious gift to the institution, the first and most profound teacher a medical student will ever have. Upon arrival at the medical school, the body is treated with the utmost care and respect. It is assigned a new identification number to ensure anonymity and protect the privacy of the deceased. The process of preparing the body for long-term study, known as embalming, is far more complex and meticulous than that used in a funeral home. It is a specialized scientific procedure designed to preserve the tissues in a state that is as close to life as possible, allowing for detailed and extended study over the course of an entire academic year. This process is itself a science and an art, performed by highly trained anatomists and technicians who understand the profound significance of their work. It is essential to distinguish this practice from organ donation. Organ donation involves the transplantation of healthy organs from a donor to a living recipient and must occur within hours of death. Whole body donation for anatomical study is a different path, where the entire body is used for education and research over a much longer period. This distinction is important because it highlights the unique purpose of this final gift. It is not about saving a single life in the present, but about educating hundreds of future doctors who will go on to save thousands of lives in the future. It is a contribution that echoes forward in time, touching countless families through the skill and knowledge of the physicians it helps to train. This alternative path for the unclaimed is a powerful example of how a society can create value and meaning from a situation of profound loss. It transforms a social problem, what to do with the unclaimed dead, into a vital social good. It takes an individual who was, by all appearances, disconnected from the community in their final days and makes them a central and revered part of the education of its most trusted professionals. However, this path is not available to everyone. The suitability criteria are strict, and the number of bodies needed by medical schools, while significant, is finite. Therefore, this journey to science runs parallel to the journey to the municipal cemetery. They are the two primary, sanctioned, and respectful final destinations that a society provides for its unclaimed members. One returns the body to the earth, a final act of quiet rest. The other transforms the body into a source of knowledge, a final act of silent teaching. Both, in their own way, represent a society's attempt to find a dignified and meaningful resolution to the lonely end of a human life. The journey into medical science does not end at the door of the anatomy lab. In many ways, this is where the most profound part of the transformation begins. Inside this unique classroom, the unclaimed individual is given a new and honored title, first patient. This term is used universally in medical schools, and it is chosen with deliberate care. It immediately reframes the relationship from one of object and observer to one of patient and student doctor. It instills from day one a sense of professional duty, gratitude, and a deep-seated respect for the person who, in death, has become their greatest teacher. Before a single student ever enters the lab, a culture of reverence is meticulously established. The first lecture of the anatomy course is rarely about the clavicle or the femur. Instead, it is about the gift they are about to receive. The course director will speak about the incredible generosity of the donors and their families, and in the case of the unclaimed, about the profound societal trust that has been placed in the students' hands. They are reminded that the bodies before them are not specimens, but were once living, breathing people who had hopes, dreams, families, and stories. They are taught that the privilege of learning from their first patient comes with a lifelong ethical responsibility to treat all future living patients with compassion and dignity. This initial orientation is a form of secular consecration, setting the lab apart as a sacred space for learning. When the students finally enter the lab, the atmosphere is one of quiet, focused solemnity. The room is brightly lit, well ventilated, and impeccably clean. The bodies are respectfully draped, with only the specific area being studied at that time uncovered. This practice, known as shrouding, is a constant visual reminder of the humanity of the donor. It maintains privacy and dignity, reinforcing the idea that this is a person, not an object. Students work in small, dedicated teams, and their first interactions are often hesitant, a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound awe. They are guided by experienced anatomists who teach them not only the structures of the body, but also the proper etiquette of the lab, how to handle the body with care, how to speak in hushed tones, how to maintain a professional and respectful demeanor at all times. Over the course of the semester or year, a unique and powerful bond forms between the students and their first patient. As they meticulously dissect and explore the intricate systems of the body, they uncover not just anatomical structures, but the physical story of a life. They might see the healed fracture from a childhood fall, the telltale signs of a lifetime of manual labor in the bones and muscles, or the surgical scars from a long-forgotten operation. These silent physical clues make the donor's past life feel incredibly present and real. Many students give their first patient a private, respectful name as a way to personalize and honor the individual they are learning from. This practice helps them bridge the gap between abstract anatomical knowledge and the living, breathing reality of their future patients. They are not just learning the branches of the brachial plexus. They are learning it from someone who once used that arm to hug a child, to paint a picture, or to build a house. The educational purpose of this final gift is finite. Once the anatomy course is complete, the medical school's responsibility to the donor enters its final, crucial phase. The school ensures that the remains are treated with the same respect in the end as they were in the beginning. The dissected remains are gathered and prepared for cremation. This is the universal practice. Every single donor, whether they came to the program by personal choice or as an unclaimed individual, is cremated. This final step ensures that the body is returned to a simple, elemental state, a process that mirrors the return to the earth in a traditional burial. The journey does not end with a cremation. Many, if not most, medical schools hold an annual memorial service or a ceremony of gratitude to honor the donors from that year. These are often deeply moving and powerful events. Medical students, faculty, and staff gather together to pay their respects. Students who have spent the year learning from their first patient will often read poems, play music, or share personal reflections on what the experience meant to them. They speak of the profound sense of connection they felt, the gratitude they have for this silent teacher, and the indelible impact the donor has had on their path to becoming a physician. They acknowledge that their careers will be built upon this foundational act of generosity. For the unclaimed individuals who are part of this ceremony, this moment is particularly poignant. Having left the world without family to mourn them, they are now mourned and remembered by a new kind of family, a community of future healers that they helped to create. Their names, if known, are read aloud. In this space, they are not anonymous, not a case number, but are honored members of the academic community. The ashes from the cremations are then either returned to the earth in a dedicated burial plot owned by the university, or, in some cases, can be claimed by any family that may have been located in the intervening year. This final, communal act of remembrance provides a powerful sense of closure. It transforms a solitary death into a legacy that is woven into the fabric of medicine, a quiet but enduring contribution to the health and well-being of the society that provided them with this last, meaningful role. The journey of an unclaimed body, whether it leads to a municipal cemetery or a medical school, is deeply shaped by the cultural and legal landscape of the society in which that person died. The Western model, with its blend of bureaucratic procedure, civic responsibility, and scientific altruism, is just one of many ways that humanity has devised to care for its ungrieved dead. Stepping back to take a global perspective reveals a fascinating tapestry of beliefs and practices, each reflecting a different understanding of community, dignity, and the sacred duty owed to every individual, even a stranger. In many parts of the world, particularly in countries with a strong, dominant religious or communal tradition, the idea of a person being buried by the state alone is almost unthinkable. The social fabric is woven in such a way that community or religious organizations naturally step in to fill the gap left by the absence of immediate family. In many Muslim-majority nations, for instance, the principle of community responsibility is deeply ingrained. Islamic tradition places a great emphasis on the swift and proper burial of the dead. It is considered a collective obligation, a fard kifaya, meaning that if some members of the community perform the duty, the entire community is absolved of sin. If a person dies without known relatives, the local mosque and its community members will almost invariably take on the responsibility. They will perform the ritual washing, ghusl, wrap the body in a simple white shroud, kafan, conduct the funeral prayer, salat al-janaza, and ensure a dignified burial in a Muslim cemetery. The cost is often covered by charitable donations, or zakat. This approach is not a formal state program, but an organic expression of faith-based duty, ensuring that no fellow believer is left to face the final journey alone. Similarly, in countries with strong Buddhist traditions, like Thailand or Japan, the community's role is central. Monasteries and local temples often become the de facto custodians of the unclaimed. In Japan, with its aging population and increasing number of kodakushi, or lonely deaths, non-profit organizations and local municipal offices work closely with Buddhist temples. The temple may perform rites, cremate the body, and place the ashes in a communal repository or ossuary. These communal graves, often located on the temple grounds, are not seen as places of shame, like the historical potter's field, but as a compassionate and practical solution. They offer a place where anyone, even a stranger, can come to offer incense and a prayer, ensuring the deceased is not entirely without remembrance. This reflects a Buddhist worldview, where the distinction between family and community is more fluid, and compassion extends to all beings. In India, a country of immense religious diversity, the approach is multifaceted. For the Hindu majority, cremation is the essential final rite. Organizations like the Nirmal Hriday Homes, founded by Mother Teresa in Kolkata, have long cared for the dying destitute. Upon death, they work to provide the appropriate final rites according to the person's faith, if known. For unclaimed Hindus, they will arrange for a simple cremation on a traditional funeral pyre, or ghat. with the ashes scattered in a sacred river like the Ganges. In the Sikh tradition, the concept of seva, or selfless service, is paramount. Gurdwaras, Sikh houses of worship, are known for providing aid to anyone in need, and this extends to the final rites. Volunteer organizations will often step in to claim bodies from city morgues and ensure a proper cremation according to Sikh custom, seeing it as their spiritual duty. Contrasting these models with the Western system is illuminating. The Western approach is largely secular and state-driven. While chaplains and volunteers may be involved, the core responsibility lies with a government entity: the coroner, the public administrator, the parks department. This system is born out of a society that values the separation of church and state and relies on legal and administrative structures to provide a universal safety net. Its strength is its universality and its orderly, documented process. It guarantees a baseline of dignified treatment for every single person, regardless of their faith or background. Its perceived weakness, however, is its impersonality. The warmth of a religious community is replaced by the efficiency of a civic procedure. In many indigenous cultures, the concept of an unclaimed individual is culturally nonsensical. Kinship networks are often vast and complex, extending far beyond the nuclear family to clans and entire communities. The responsibility for a person, in life and in death, is shared among a wide web of relatives. Even if a person's immediate family is gone, the clan or tribe is obligated to care for their remains. The idea that a person could be so disconnected as to have no one to perform their rites is a sign of a profound social breakdown. The rituals themselves are often deeply tied to the land and the community's cosmology, making burial by outsiders a spiritual violation. These different approaches are not a simple ranking of which is better. Each is a logical outgrowth of its culture's core values. Societies that place a high value on religious identity and communal obligation create systems where faith-based groups are the primary caretakers. Societies that prioritize individual rights and secular governance create state-run systems that are methodical and impartial. What is fascinating is how each system strives to answer the same fundamental human question: how do we honor the dead when the people who were supposed to do it are not there? Each solution, whether it's a prayer circle at a mosque, a rite performed by a Buddhist monk, or a numbered casket lowered into a grave by a municipal worker, is an attempt to affirm the value of a life. It is a powerful statement that even in a world of billions, the end of a single solitary existence matters, and the community, in whatever form it takes, has a final, sacred role to play. Beneath the layers of human dignity, cultural practice, and ethical consideration lies a stark and unavoidable reality. Providing a final resting place for the unclaimed comes at a price. This is a quiet, often overlooked, and yet significant financial burden that is borne not by a family, but by the public at large. Following the money through this final, posthumous journey reveals a great deal about our society's priorities, the economic pressures that contribute to the problem, and the cold, hard calculations that sometimes have to be made when compassion intersects with a budget line. The costs begin to accumulate from the moment a person dies without next of kin. The hospital incurs expenses for holding the body in its morgue and for the administrative time of social workers trying to locate family. Once the case is transferred to the coroner or medical examiner, the public expenditure grows significantly. The transportation of the body, the secure, refrigerated storage at the county morgue, which can sometimes last for months during a lengthy investigation, all have associated costs in terms of facilities, utilities, and staff time. The investigative work itself, while a core function of the office, represents salaried hours dedicated to searching databases and following leads. For a large city morgue that handles hundreds or even thousands of such cases a year, these operational costs add up to a substantial public expense. When the journey leads to a municipal burial, the direct costs become more tangible. The first is the casket. While simple, these plain pine or composite boxes are not free. A city or county must contract with a supplier and purchase them, often in bulk. Then there is the cost of the burial itself. This includes the labor and fuel for the equipment used to open and close the grave, the administrative overhead of maintaining the cemetery and its all-important burial records, and the perpetual cost of land maintenance, mowing the grass, maintaining fences, and ensuring the grounds are kept in a safe and respectable state. While a single municipal burial might only cost the taxpayer a few hundred to a couple of $1,000s, a fraction of the price of a private funeral. Multiplying that by the hundreds or thousands of unclaimed individuals each year results in a multi-million-dollar line item in a city's budget. This entire financial burden falls squarely on the shoulders of the public, funded through local taxes. It is, in essence, the price a community pays to uphold its social contract with its most vulnerable members. Now, let's consider the economic calculation from the other perspective, the path to medical science. When an unclaimed body is donated to a medical school's anatomical gift program, the financial equation shifts dramatically. The medical school, a private or state-funded institution, assumes almost all of the subsequent costs. They arrange and pay for the transportation of the body from the city morgue to their facility. They bear the significant expense of the specialized embalming process, the secure storage of the body for the duration of its use, and the eventual cremation. In this scenario, the financial burden on the taxpayer is significantly reduced. The city is relieved of the cost of the casket, the burial, and the long-term maintenance of the grave plot. From a purely fiscal standpoint, anatomical donation is a far more economical solution for a municipality. It transforms a financial liability into a cost-neutral or even cost-saving outcome. This economic reality creates a powerful, albeit unspoken, incentive for public officials to work closely with anatomical donation programs. It is a rare instance where the most financially prudent option also happens to provide a profound societal value in the form of medical education. This alignment of economic interest and public good is a key reason why the partnership between coroners' offices and medical schools is so robust. It is a symbiotic relationship where the city solves a practical and financial problem, and the university receives the invaluable gift it needs to train the next generation of doctors. However, it's crucial to understand how larger, systemic economic pressures contribute to the rising number of unclaimed individuals in the first place. The phenomenon of funeral poverty that we touched on earlier is a direct consequence of decades of wage stagnation, combined with the soaring costs of living and end-of-life care. A funeral, which was once a manageable expense for a working-class family, has become a luxury that many cannot afford. Families are increasingly being forced into the heart-wrenching position of refusing to claim a loved one simply because they lack the several $1,000s required for a basic service. This is not a personal failing. It is a systemic one. It is a direct reflection of a society where the gap between wages and essential costs has grown into a chasm. Moreover, the decline of social safety nets, cuts to mental health services, and the affordable housing crisis all play a role. These systemic pressures push more people to the margins of society, where they are more likely to become disconnected from family and community support networks. The rising number of unclaimed bodies in our city morgues is not just a collection of individual tragedies. It is a lagging indicator of our collective economic and social health. It is a quiet but persistent alarm bell, signaling the points of failure in our social fabric. The cost borne by the taxpayer for a municipal burial is, in a sense, the final invoice for these larger societal shortcomings. Thus, the price of a final goodbye is not just the sum on a ledger for a casket and a burial plot. It is the accumulated cost of economic inequality, the price of fractured communities, and the financial manifestation of our collective responsibility to provide a dignified end, even when, and especially when, the individual and their family could not afford one. Among all the pathways that lead a person to become unclaimed, perhaps the most complex and emotionally charged is the one where a family is found. They are legally recognized as the next of kin, and they formally refuse to take responsibility for the body. This is a scenario that moves beyond the simple absence of connection into a realm of active disconnection. It creates a painful legal and ethical limbo for everyone involved and forces us to confront the difficult truth that the bonds of kinship, while powerful, are not always unbreakable. The primary driver behind this phenomenon, as we've explored, is often stark financial reality. Funeral poverty is not a theoretical concept. It is a brutal calculation that an increasing number of families are forced to make. Imagine a daughter receiving the call from the coroner's office. She is already working 2 jobs to support her children, struggling with rent and medical bills. The grief of losing her estranged father is real, but it is immediately overshadowed by the terrifying prospect of a $10,000 funeral bill. She simply does not have it. The choice is not between a fancy funeral and a simple one. It is between claiming the body and potentially facing eviction. In this situation, the formal refusal is an act of desperate pragmatism. The family must sign a legal document, often an affidavit of refusal, which officially relinquishes their right and responsibility to the deceased's remains. This is a moment freighted with shame, guilt, and a profound sense of failure, even though the circumstances are often far beyond their control. However, the reasons for refusal are not always economic. Sometimes, the wounds of family history are simply too deep to heal, even in death. Consider a family torn apart by decades of addiction, abuse, or severe mental illness. A son may have spent his entire adult life trying to recover from the trauma inflicted by a parent. He may have severed all contact years ago as an act of self-preservation. When the call comes that this parent has died, it doesn't bring a wave of nostalgic grief. It brings a tsunami of complicated, painful memories. To claim the body would mean re-engaging with that trauma, organizing a funeral that would feel dishonest, and mourning a relationship that was a source of pain, not comfort. For this son, refusing to claim the body is not an act of cruelty, but a final, necessary boundary. It is a declaration that the cycle of pain has ended, and he will not allow it to disrupt the life he has painstakingly built. Similarly, profound estrangement can create a simple, unbridgeable chasm of time and distance. A woman may not have seen or spoken to her brother in 40 years, since a bitter argument over an inheritance. They have lived on opposite sides of the country, building entirely separate lives. To her, he is no longer family in any meaningful sense. He is a stranger who shares some of her DNA. When the coroner's office locates her, she may feel a flicker of sadness for the brother she once knew, but she feels no connection to the man he became. She has no knowledge of his life, his friends, or his wishes. Claiming his body would feel like an act of profound inauthenticity. She may politely decline, stating that she did not know him and is not in a position to handle his affairs. In her view, the state, which was more a part of his recent life than she was, is the more appropriate entity to provide his final rest. This act of refusal creates a unique legal and emotional situation for the public officials involved. Their primary goal is to return the deceased to their family. A refusal is, in one sense, a failure of that mission. Yet they are also trained to be compassionate and non-judgmental. They hear these painful stories every day. They understand that they cannot force a family to take on an emotional or financial burden they are unable or unwilling to bear. Once the formal refusal is signed and notarized, the legal tie is severed. The deceased is then officially reclassified as unclaimed, even though a family has been identified and located. The individual's journey then merges back onto the main path, heading toward a municipal burial or anatomical donation. The emotional weight on the family who refuses can be immense and long-lasting. There is often a deep conflict between their personal feelings and societal expectations. Society has powerful, unspoken rules about family obligation, especially in death. To refuse to bury one's own parent or sibling is to violate a deep-seated taboo. This can lead to intense feelings of guilt, shame, and judgment from others who may not understand the complex history behind the decision. The family is left to grieve not only the death, but also the brokenness of the relationship that made the refusal necessary. They are often the silent, uncounted victims of this process, left to carry a secret and complicated grief that they can rarely share. Ultimately, the phenomenon of kin refusal serves as a powerful lens through which to view the complexities of human relationships. It reminds us that family is not just a biological fact, but a living, breathing entity that requires maintenance, forgiveness, and connection to survive. When those things are absent for long enough, the bond can wither, and for some, eventually break. The officials in the coroner's office are the quiet witnesses to these final fractures. Their work requires a delicate balance of bureaucratic diligence and profound human empathy as they navigate the painful intersection of legal duty and the raw, often messy, reality of family life. In the quiet, methodical work of piecing together a life from its faint, fading traces, investigators have traditionally relied on analog tools, paper records, phone calls, and the occasional public notice. But in the 21st century, a new set of tools has emerged, offering a faint but powerful hope in the most difficult of cases. Technology, particularly in the fields of genetics and data analysis, is beginning to pierce the veil of anonymity that has shrouded the unidentified for centuries. It is a slow, painstaking, and ethically complex process, but it is beginning to give names back to the nameless in ways that were once the stuff of science fiction. The most revolutionary of these tools is, without question, DNA. For decades, DNA has been used in forensics to match a suspect to a crime scene, but its application in identifying the unknown has been more limited, requiring a direct comparison to a sample from a known relative. The true game changer has been the rise of forensic genealogy. This technique combines traditional DNA analysis with the vast crowdsourced power of public genealogy databases, websites where millions of people have voluntarily uploaded their own DNA profiles to trace their ancestry and find distant relatives. The process is remarkable. When a body is unidentified, a forensic lab can create a detailed DNA profile from a sample of bone or tissue. This profile is then uploaded to one of the public genealogy databases that permit law enforcement use. The system doesn't look for an exact match, but for partial matches, people who share significant segments of DNA with the unidentified person, indicating they are a cousin, a great aunt, or a third cousin twice removed. Once these distant relatives are found, the real work begins. A specialized team of forensic genealogists, often working with cold case detectives, starts to build a family tree. Using the distant relative as a starting point, they use census records, obituaries, marriage licenses, and social media to build the family tree forward and backward in time, trying to find the point of intersection that leads to the identity of the unknown individual. Think of it as a vast, collaborative Sudoku puzzle, where each piece of genetic and historical information helps to fill in another blank, until a single, logical identity emerges. This technique has famously been used to solve decades-old murder cases, but it is also being quietly and effectively applied to John and Jane Doe cases. It can give a name to a person who has been buried in a potter's field for 30 years, finally allowing officials to place a name on an unmarked grave and bring a long overdue sense of closure to a family that never knew what happened. It is a powerful testament to the fact that even when we are disconnected in life, the indelible threads of our shared ancestry remain. Beyond DNA, the sheer power of the internet and social media has become an invaluable, if sometimes unpredictable, investigative tool. We saw earlier that public appeals are a last resort. In the past, this meant a small notice in a local newspaper that few might see. Today, a single post on a police department's or medical examiner's Facebook page can be shared thousands of times within hours, reaching a vast, geographically diverse audience. These posts often include a facial reconstruction sketch created by a forensic artist, a detailed description of clothing, or a photograph of a unique tattoo. People from all over the world can see the information and, in some cases, recognize a long-lost friend or a neighbor who simply vanished one day. This digital word of mouth has broken cases that had been cold for years, harnessing the power of collective memory on a global scale. However, These powerful new tools are not without their limitations and ethical quandaries. The use of public genealogy databases, for instance, raises significant privacy concerns. Most of the people who uploaded their DNA to trace their family tree never imagined they would be helping to identify a distant, unknown relative in a city morgue, or even implicate a family member in a crime. This has led to an ongoing debate about consent, data security, and where the line should be drawn between the public good of solving a case and an individual's right to genetic privacy. As a result, the policies of these databases are constantly evolving, and access for law enforcement is becoming more restricted, requiring a delicate balance of competing interests. Furthermore, technology is not a magic wand. These techniques are expensive, time-consuming, and require a high level of specialized expertise. A single forensic genealogy case can cost thousands of dollars and take hundreds of hours of work. For an underfunded public administrator's office, which may be dealing with dozens of unclaimed cases at once, these advanced methods are often a luxury they simply cannot afford. They must triage their resources, reserving these powerful tools for the most compelling or high-profile cases, while the majority are still handled through more traditional and less effective means. And finally, technology can only take us so far. It can provide a name, a clue, a potential family connection, but it cannot mend a broken relationship. It cannot solve the problem of funeral poverty. It cannot force an estranged sibling to feel a sense of obligation. The technology can bridge the information gap, but it cannot bridge the emotional and economic gaps that are so often at the heart of why a person becomes unclaimed. So while these faint hopes offered by technology are real and growing, they are not a complete solution. They are another tool in the investigator's toolkit, a powerful new light to shine into the darkest corners of anonymity. They represent our enduring human desire to solve mysteries, to give a name to every face, and to ensure that in the end, no one is truly forgotten, even if all that remains is a whisper in the vast interconnected network of our shared digital and genetic code. In our journey following the unclaimed, we have focused on the processes, the history, and the societal forces at play. But the entire system, from the first moment of stillness in the hospital to the final act of burial or donation, is operated by a small, dedicated group of people. They are the quiet keepers of this final threshold, the public servants and professionals whose daily work exists at the stark intersection of bureaucracy and mortality. Theirs is a world few of us will ever see, and their personal philosophies and coping mechanisms are essential to maintaining a system that is not just efficient, but also humane. Consider the morgue technician, or diener. Their job is often sensationalized in fiction, but the reality is one of quiet, methodical care. They are responsible for the physical stewardship of the deceased. They receive the bodies, meticulously document their condition and any accompanying property, and ensure they are placed in safe, refrigerated storage. They work in a sterile, silent environment, and their primary interaction is with those who can no longer speak. To do this work, day in and day out, requires a specific mindset. Many develop a form of respectful detachment, a professional focus on the technical aspects of their job as a way to manage the profound emotional weight. They see their role not as dealing with death, but as providing a crucial service of care and preservation. One technician described his philosophy this way: "My job is to be their guardian. They are in my care until they can move on to the next place. I treat every person on my table as if they were my own grandfather. That's the only way to do it right." Then there are the public administrators and the investigators in the coroner's office. They are the detectives we've followed, the ones tasked with the race against time to find a name and a family. Their work is a constant oscillation between hope and resignation. They spend their days sifting through databases and making difficult phone calls. They might spend a week piecing together a family tree, finally locate a distant nephew, and feel a surge of success, only to have that nephew politely but firmly refuse to be involved. The emotional toll of these repeated encounters with grief, poverty, and family dysfunction can be immense. Successful investigators develop a thick skin, but also a deep well of empathy. They learn to listen without judgment, to understand that a refusal is rarely born of malice. They find meaning not just in the cases they solve, but in the diligence of the search itself. Even when we fail to find a family, one investigator said, we succeed in honoring the person by trying. We give them our time, our focus. We make sure their story doesn't just end in a file. The search itself is a form of remembrance. Let us not forget the grave diggers at the municipal cemeteries. These are the men and women who perform the final physical act of returning a body to the earth. Their work is physically demanding and often performed in solitude, far from the public eye. They operate the machinery, they measure the plots, and they ensure that each numbered casket is laid to rest in its precise, recorded location. They are the final witnesses. They see the simple pine boxes. They know the stories of solitude they represent, and they often develop a profound, almost spiritual connection to the land they tend. They see the cemetery not as a sad, anonymous field, but as a community. They are its caretakers. One longtime gravedigger for a city potter's field remarked, "People think this must be a depressing job, but I see it differently. I'm providing a home, a quiet, peaceful place. I might be the only person here when they're buried, but I'm here. They're not alone, and I come back every day and watch over them." Finally, there is the anatomy lab, curator, or director. This is the person who oversees the anatomical gift program at a medical school. They are the bridge between the world of the coroner and the world of medical education. They handle the sensitive logistics of transporting and preparing the donors, but their most important role is as the keeper of the program's ethical flame. They are the ones who instill a culture of reverence in the students. They manage the memorial services and are often the point of contact for any families who might come forward later. Their work is a delicate balance of science and humanism. They must be precise and methodical in their anatomical preparations, but they must also be compassionate storytellers, constantly reminding the students and faculty of the incredible gift they have received. They see their donors, including the unclaimed, not as a means to an end, but as silent collaborators in the mission of healing. These are just a few of the keepers of the quiet. What unites them all is a shared sense of purpose and a remarkable ability to find meaning in a role that society largely prefers to ignore. They don't do it for recognition. Their work is, by its nature, hidden. They do it because they have a deep-seated belief in the importance of dignity, order, and care. They have found a way to look directly at the starkest realities of human solitude and respond not with despair, but with quiet, consistent, and compassionate action. They are the unseen threads in the social safety net, the hands that ensure the final chapter of even the loneliest life is written with a measure of respect. While the official systems for handling the unclaimed are designed to be methodical and respectful, their inherent bureaucracy can often feel cold and impersonal. It is in the spaces between the regulations, in the small, voluntary acts of kindness, that we find the most poignant expressions of our shared humanity. Across the country and around the world, a quiet countercurrent of community-led initiatives and individual acts of grace has emerged, all aimed at one simple goal: to ensure that no life, however solitary in its end, passes without some form of personal remembrance. These are the unofficial rituals that restore a measure of warmth to a cold process. Often, this work is led by chaplains and interfaith ministers who volunteer their time with coroners' offices and public cemeteries. When a municipal burial is scheduled, a chaplain might make it their mission to be present. They may not know the name of the person being buried, nor anything about their life or faith, but they stand as a human witness. They will offer a simple, universal prayer or read a piece of secular poetry that speaks to the dignity of a life lived. This small act of presence is profoundly significant. It transforms a simple interment into a funeral, however modest. It carves out a moment of sacred time and space, a brief pause in the administrative process to acknowledge that a soul is passing. One volunteer chaplain described her role this way: "I am a proxy for the family that isn't here. I stand in for every person who might have loved them, every friend who lost touch. My presence says, you mattered. Your life was seen. You will not be forgotten." Beyond the graveside, community groups have sprung up with the specific mission of memorializing the unclaimed. In some cities, organizations hold annual ceremonies where the names of all the individuals who were buried in the potter's field that year are read aloud. These events are often held in a public park or a community hall, and citizens are invited to come and listen, to bear witness to the names. Hearing a name spoken aloud is a powerful act of restoration. It pulls an individual back from the anonymity of a case number and reasserts their identity. For a moment, each person is remembered not for the loneliness of their death, but for the simple, profound fact of their existence. These ceremonies are a form of collective eulogy, a way for a city to wrap its arms around its most forgotten members and claim them as their own. Other initiatives take a more permanent, physical form. In a county in Oregon, a group of volunteers worked with the local government to transform a section of the public cemetery. For years, the unclaimed were buried with only a small, numbered metal marker. The volunteer group raised funds to place a simple, flat granite headstone on every single grave, each one engraved with the person's name and their dates of birth and death. For the unidentified, the stone simply reads, "Unknown," but the act of placing the stone itself is a gesture of honor. They also planted a memorial garden at the entrance to the cemetery, a place of beauty and reflection. This project physically transformed a landscape of anonymity into a place of individual remembrance. Sometimes, the acts of remembrance are intensely personal and creative. There is the story of a poet in California who began visiting the county morgue to collect the names of the unclaimed. He would then write a short, haiku-like poem for each person, imagining a small, beautiful moment from their life. The feeling of sun on their face, the taste of a favorite food, the sound of a piece of music. He published these poems in a small local journal, offering these imagined memories back to the community as a way to rehumanize the statistics. It was his way of ensuring that each person was remembered not just as a name on a list, but as a being who had experienced the sensory richness of life. These examples, and countless others like them, speak to a deep and primal human need, the need to mark a life's end. We are storytelling creatures, and a story feels incomplete without a final chapter. When a person dies alone, that final chapter is left unwritten. These rituals of remembrance are our attempt to write it for them. They are born from the simple, empathetic impulse to imagine what we would want for ourselves or for our own loved ones in such a circumstance. We would want our name to be spoken. We would want someone to stand by as we are returned to the earth. We would want a stone to mark our place. We would want to be remembered for a moment of joy, not for the solitude of our departure. These small but powerful acts do not change the fundamental realities of why people become unclaimed. They do not solve poverty or mend broken families, but they do offer a powerful counterbalance to the impersonality of the system. They are the grace notes in a somber melody. They reaffirm the idea that community is not just about the people we know, but about the shared responsibility we have for one another, especially for the stranger in our midst. They demonstrate that while the state can provide a burial, only the community can provide a true farewell. And in doing so, these volunteers, chaplains, and artists remind us that even when all personal ties have been severed, the larger, invisible thread of our shared humanity remains. We have followed a quiet and extraordinary journey. It begins in the profound stillness of a last lonely bed and traces a path from the clinical precision of the morgue through the diligent search for a name to one of two final, deeply symbolic destinations: the communal earth of the municipal cemetery or the hallowed halls of medical science. This journey, undertaken by thousands of unseen individuals every year, is more than just a logistical process for handling the dead. It is a mirror reflecting our society's deepest convictions about dignity, community, and the enduring meaning of a human life. In synthesizing this journey, we see that it is a story of transformation. A person, once defined by their relationships, memories, and personal history, is slowly, respectfully transformed into a public responsibility. Their identity becomes a puzzle to be solved, their body a sacred vessel to be cared for, and their final resting place a matter of civic duty. Whether that final act is the gentle lowering of a simple pine box into the earth, or the reverent acceptance of a first patient by a group of aspiring doctors, both outcomes are born from the same fundamental principle: that no one should be simply erased. Each path, in its own way, is a refusal to let a life end in utter oblivion. Returning to our central question, what does our treatment of the unclaimed reveal about us? We find an answer that is full of complexity and contradiction. It reveals a society that is, on one hand, remarkably compassionate. We have built intricate, expensive, and largely invisible systems to ensure that every single person, regardless of their circumstances, receives a dignified end. We employ investigators to fight for their names, caretakers to guard their bodies, and volunteers to remember their passing. This is the mark of an advanced and caring civilization, one that codifies its empathy into law and procedure. It is a testament to the strength of our social safety nets, a promise that even if you fall through every other crack in society, this final net will be there to catch you. And yet, this same process reveals the very existence of those cracks with stark clarity. The sheer number of people who embark on this solitary journey is a quiet indictment of the forces that isolate us. It speaks to the erosion of community ties, the immense pressure of economic hardship, the silent suffering of the mentally ill, and the quiet loneliness that can settle upon the elderly. Our meticulous system for handling the unclaimed is, in this light, not just a compassionate response, but also a necessary one, a solution to a problem that our way of life helps to create. It is a final, institutional act of connection in a world where personal connections are becoming increasingly fragile. Our treatment of the unclaimed is therefore a direct and unsparing measure of how we define community and who we are willing to include in that definition when it matters most. What, then, is the unclaimed legacy of a person who dies alone? It is not a legacy written in a will or carried on by children. It is a quieter, more abstract inheritance. For the individual who becomes a silent teacher in an anatomy lab, their legacy is etched into the skilled hands and compassionate hearts of hundreds of future doctors. It is a legacy of healing that ripples outward in ways they could never have imagined. For the individual laid to rest under a numbered marker in a grassy field, their legacy is a silent but powerful question posed to all of us who walk by. It asks us to consider our own connections, to reach out to a neighbor, to call a distant relative, to strengthen the threads of our own communities so that fewer will have to make this journey alone. In the end, we are left not with simple answers, but with a deeper appreciation for the profound truth that every life is a story. The systems we have explored, however imperfect, are an attempt to honor that truth. They are a promise that even when the book of a life is closed and there is no one left to read it, the book itself will not be thrown away. It will be carefully shelved, its location noted, its existence acknowledged. The quiet dignity of these processes, the search, the care, the burial, the donation, the remembrance, is a reflection of our better angels. It is the final, quiet, and enduring statement that every single body was once a life filled with the story, time 2.5s. And that, in and of itself, is a thing worth honoring.